Religious minorities across the Middle East are under attack, and communities are being absolutely decimated in multiple parts of the region, certainly in Syria. We're here today with Mansur Ashkar, who is one of the most interesting humans that I've ever had the pleasure to encounter. Mansur is a Druze Arab Israeli, also a Christian who has served in the IDF, an elite special forces unit, and he is a wealth of knowledge and experience on all things Middle East. He has his own show, the Mansur Ashkar Show. You definitely want to check that out, and you definitely want to follow him, and we'll add links here. So Mansur, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. Very much looking forward to meeting with you and discussing what's going on. Your heart must be heavy these days.
Well, thank you, Simon. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here, and I think we've met maybe for a short time in Israel. I definitely know your brother and your family. Great family, and as you mentioned, yes, it's a very difficult time for any Druze around the world. Many people back home might not even know what the Druze is. So if you don't mind, I'll just throw kind of just one short sentence.
Please do. Please tell us as much as you like about the Druze. The Druze, what we know is it's a very secretive religion, connected to Islam and et cetera, but also quite different than Islam traditionally as we know it. But I'll let you go into it, because I really do not know a lot about it, and I don't think very many people do.
No, many don't. I know it for experience. So there's about 1 million Druze around the world, hence why most people don't know about the Druze. And the Druze religion, people see it connected to Islam, and in some ways you can say it is. It is not Islam. It's its own religion. It is one of the religions that survived under Islam, I'll say it that way. People don't know that throughout the Muslim conquest, many different minorities, groups, religion groups, just either were completely destroyed, genocided, or they were forced to convert by sword, or by generations to come by living very harsh life under Islam. Because Islam is not very tolerant towards other religion, and it's very focused on converting everyone. So the fact that you still have Druze today after 1,000 years of living under Islam is quite miraculous, I have to say. The Druze see themselves as descendant from Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, the father of Zipporah, and from that they see a very strong connection to Christianity and Judaism and all the other religions that basically believe in the one God. One of the real ancient names of the Druze is Bani Ma'ruf, or the Muwahhidun. Muwahhidun comes from the word wahad, echad, yachid, and it's the whole idea of the people who believe in one God. So the Druze basically started a 1,000 years old New Age religion, you can call it. They came and said about 1,000 years ago, God might send different prophets to different religions. People, man of God, who will come and teach them and point them at the one God. So they came and offered Islam basically a pretty cool idea, saying, listen, we don't need to go and destroy all other religions. We can accept them as they are. Christians, they have their the Messiah, the Son of God. Jesus came to them. Jews had Moses. We had Jethro. You guys had Muhammad who came. Other religions, even the Hindus, and etc., etc. Each one is pointing at a different way of aspects of God, and we should accept all of them. So it's a very tolerant religion. The only thing is that Islam was the wrong crowd to present that idea to, because they came and they asked them, wait, so can God send a prophet after Muhammad? And the Jews said, of course, he's God. He's the Almighty God. He can do whatever he wants. If you want to send someone tomorrow, a messenger, to come and speak in his name, he will do that. So then Islam said, no, Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, and because you guys claim that someone else can come after him, you are kuffars, and we need to kill you. You're infidels. And that's when the Druze persecution started for the last 1,000 years. And that's why the Druze fled. It started in Egypt, by the way, this whole movement. They went down to Egypt and they ran away back from Egypt. So they went to the mountains of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, mostly, hiding in the mountains, being farmers and warriors at the same time, and just basically trying to survive. Up until today, the Druze are trying to survive, and often they need to hide their identity and their religion. For example, in Jordan, the Druze are considered as just another faction of the Muslims, and they're even forced to go and pray the Muslim prayers and learn about Islam. They're learning about their own religion in secret because they can't really expose it. And in Lebanon and in Syria, there's quite a lot of tension with the Druze and their Muslim neighbors. Sometimes they had better days, sometimes they had worse days. In Syria, it's coming to the point now that Islam have called jihad on the Druze, and they basically just want to go and completely kill them, all of them. The only place in the Middle East that Druze were proudly practicing their faith and holding into their identity and not hiding it is actually in Israel. That was the only time in their maybe 1,000 years history that they came and felt like, wow, we can proudly hold our flags, we can proudly, say who we are. And through that, the Druze in Israel have become, into some aspect, like the Jews in the world, like a very small minority that is very successful. They're overachievers. They're very good at what they do in many fields, not only in the army, because many of them are very good soldiers. Because when you fight for 1,000 years to survive, you become a pretty good warrior. But in general, they're very good with science, with education, with culture. So became very good citizens in that nation. But that's a very unique case where you allow a minority to flourish because you don't persecute them, but you actually uplift them. And that's what Israel is doing. The rest of the Arab world is not doing that, and the Druze there are still struggling for their life. So that was just a shortcut kind of about the Druze history.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. It truly is fascinating, and it seems to be a trend, although not one that is largely publicized or even celebrated as it should be, of religious minorities in Israel thriving and being the only place in the Middle East where that is the case. And so we can unpack that and talk more about that as well. You mentioned the word warriors. And I do know, having lived in Israel for many, many years, that the Druze are kind of known, not just amongst Israeli society, but also amongst the surrounding nations as being warriors. And I have this feeling that, even Hezbollah and Hamas and these terror organizations across the Middle East kind of fear the Druze, if I'm not mistaken. They kind of know, like, don't mess with the Druze. And I know that Israel has even had to hold the Druze back several times over the course of the last 2 years since October 7th and the ensuing war. And I know that the Druze were victims of this horrible attack in the north. We can talk about some of that. But what an amazing culture. And you, Mansur, are also a warrior. Would love to talk a little bit about that as much as you feel comfortable talking about, because a lot of people don't know that, I know you consider yourself an Arab, and I know even that is nuanced and complex, but a lot of people don't know that there are many Arabs and non-Jews that are A, Israelis, and B, serve in the IDF. So can you share a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah, definitely. So that's true. I am a warrior, and I come from a family of warriors. My grandfather was one of the highest ranking Druze officer. He fought in all the Israeli war. He actually got rewarded by the chief of staff of Israel with an AK-47 back in the days because he single-handedly killed 13 terrorists in one combat. And then he probably killed more than 50 terrorists, just by himself. Or enemies of Israel in all the wars of Israel. So he was like a vicious
And
warrior.
what was his rank? He was the highest rank.
He was the first Druze officer to go to the rank of, I would say it's like Aluf Mishneh. It's very hard to know.
Which would be a brigadier general, I think,
Something like
something like
that.
that.
Something like
Yeah,
that. Yeah, it was
definitely
very
a general
high.
of some sort, but I think it's a brigadier general.
Yeah, and he opened the door for many other minorities. He was the first non-Jew to light the Masu'ah, the torch of freedom, that we have, or I'm not so sure how you call it in English, in the Independence Day. So he got a great honor to do that, and he fought in all of the Israeli war. He was a very good friend of Yitzhak Rabin. There's pictures of him, of Rabin and Sharon, kind of in the same picture, the Moshe Dayan with the patch and all these stuff. So I grew up in a very patriotic, very, Israel-loving family, but also a family that knew that the price of peace comes on the shoulder of strong men and women that are willing to go and sacrifice their life to preserve that peace. Because, planet Earth is like a Jurassic Park. You have the park inside and you have all the animals and monsters outside, and they would love to come and tear down the life that you have. In the Middle East, you see that very clearly. If you give them the chance, they will come and destroy everything that is beautiful about Israel. So the fact that we have Israel is because strong men and women were willing to go and take the burden of join the army, give their time, the best years of their lives. I actually thought that I'll be a pacifist when I was 16. I kind of thought for myself, like, I never want to go to war. And I was telling my mom that. I said, you know what? I don't want to kill anyone. I never want to be in that position that someone want to kill me and I want to kill him. And then as I was processing that thing through my head, what does it mean to be a pacifist? I kind of realized that it's a very cute game that you can play when you're living in Switzerland or Denmark. It's fun, it's cute. Canada can play that game because they have America protecting them. But someplace in the world, you can't really play that game because you need warriors. You need people that are willing to go and stand and fight the bad guys if they come to kill the good guys. We've seen that on October 7th. In the beginning of October 7th, the ones that held the line for the entire nation of Israel were civilians, fathers and mothers, that went and fought with kitchen knives, with the pistol that they had, and special tequila units of the special forces and the Shabak that were easily deployed. They went with helicopters and landed, some Shaldag units, some Shahedet 13. Some of these units, including my, former unit and some of my friends, ended up going there 7, 8 people, 4 people fighting against tens, if not even hundreds of terrorists. And they held them back. So the whole, call it, line of defense of Israel was held by strong men and women that voluntarily went to fight the enemy. There was the ones who woke up there in that reality, but then the ones who went. So I already realized that when I was 16, that this beautiful Israel, this beautiful modern democracy that I'm living in, is here because other brave men and women were willing to give away some of their beautiful life. The way of life that I'm loving and appreciating so much, my turn is going to come and I need to go and do that, because it's going to be very selfish if I choose to live a wonderful life knowing that I'm living that because of the sacrifice of strong men and women that are willing to go and fight the bad guys. So I volunteered. Well, I didn't volunteer because in Israel, we all get drafted to the army. When I say we all, it's Jews and Druze. That's the only two that actually have mandatory military service. Other religious groups like Christians, Muslims, they can voluntarily go, but they're not forced to go, which is beautiful because they have all the rights, but not all the obligations. So I went and I was supposed to go and do the program to become a fighter pilot, but I was young and stupid and I just wanted to jump out of helicopters and shoot guns. So I decided to go. Yeah, could have been a pilot now.
How'd that work out?
Yeah, exactly. I can be a mercenary now.
Right. Great.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very safe life. So I went to the special forces. I went through several of the elite units of the IDF. One of them was focused on counterterrorism and hostage rescue. And I got to see the whole conflict from living as an Arab, growing up as a Druze, living in a Jewish town, going to a Christian church, and growing up in Israel. And I was then in the military. I was on the defense and the offense. I was behind enemy lines. I was in Gaza for a very long time, in Ramallah, the West Bank, in Lebanon, and also inside of Israel. So it gave me a very unique perspective. And I was a commander also in the army. So, I saw it from the leadership, from the policy making, call it, strategic making kind of aspect, and also from the boots on the ground. And through all this experience, it gave me a very good picture about Israel, the good and the bad, like any other country. The things that I would love to see improving, and also things that I'm so glad to have. But also, it gave me a very good insight of what does it mean living in the Middle East and who are the enemies of Israel. And now we're starting to see them. People, I was not surprised on October 7th by the cruelty of Hamas. It didn't surprise me even a bit. I was maybe surprised by the magnitude because we got caught by surprise, and then so many terrorists came. Same thing, I was not surprised by the cruelty of the Syrian regime. What they did to the Druze. It's basically October 7 on steroids. Only October 7 in Israel stopped after 2 days because the IDF stopped it. In Syria, there was no IDF to stop it. So it continued for about 12 days until the IDF ended up stopping it. But you see this pattern again. The IDF is the only one that is stopping genocide attempts in the Middle East. Meanwhile, the IDF is being called again and again as the one committing a genocide.
Crazy. So let's unpack some of this. A couple things I want to just fall back on, because I think the Western world needs to hear your voice like they've never needed it. And you've said some very interesting things, and I love the fact that it comes through the lens of personal experience. One thing that you alluded to is that pacifism is a luxury. And those of us that have served in militaries and those of us that have lived in places where that is not a luxury, we don't have the luxury of being pacifist. If we were pacifist, we wouldn't exist in Israel. But I think things are changing in the West quickly. And I don't know how far or if you think the West may have to move off that position at some point. But what would you say to people in the United States, people in Canada, that, there's this whole sort of movement towards isolationism in the United States, for instance, that no wars are good and no violence is ever necessary, et cetera, et cetera. Just, if there are a few sentences you could say to address that based on your experience, what would you say? And what do you think is coming?
Well, I think really bad days are coming. I think very bad days, and there's going to be, unfortunately, the way I see it, unless drastic moves are done now, we might end up in some serious wars with a lot of bloodshed. And the people who say that wars are bad, they're right, but it depends on when do you say it and at what time. If you can prevent a war before it starts, that's great. But if you allow certain things to happen, then war becomes inevitable. And now it's the question is who's going to win. It's not anymore how can we prevent the war. I'll give you an example. If you would have stopped Hamas when Hamas was very small, I remember days in Gaza when I used to go there with my father and we'll just go to the beach. I remember talking to one guy from the Shabak who used to share with me that back in his days, if someone will have a makeshift pistol in Gaza from a tube and some gunpowder, or I don't know what, the whole Shabak, the SWAT will go and raid his house, and everybody was talking about it. Like, wow, there's a terrorist. Now Gaza have more arsenal than some armies, than some modern armies. So the fact that Hamas growing was ignored back then ended up to the inevitable outcome of the destruction of Gaza, the full-on destruction of Gaza. You look at Gaza today, it's completely obliterated. And because we gave Hamas 16 years, several $billion budget of humanitarian aid and tax-paying money from America and Canada and other places to deprive their people, educate them to become a death cult, basically, to worship death and to want to have Jewish people massacred from the age of 5, and build all these tunnels underground, all these dungeons, and get ready to booby trap every single house and hospital and kindergarten in Gaza for the coming of Israel. So they've been waiting for this epic battle of the clashes of Hamas and Israel with one goal: kill as many Jews as you can and Christians and Israelis in general, and then try to hide behind your people for as long as possible and make your people die as much as possible because they counted on Western civilization, Western media, to have a soft stomach for humanitarian, and then to call Israel, stop the war, too many dead children. So that was their strategy. The only way to defeat Hamas today is by war. If we would have done it 15, 16 years ago, it might have been a different way. So sometimes you just think that wars are just bad. It's a very, very general thing to say, and also very naive things to say. World War II, if America would have not get involved, we'd be living under Nazi Germany. Planet Earth. There's this book, I forgot the name of it, but that talks about if Nazi Germany would have won, and you see like the image of the book as the Statue of Liberty holding a swastika, and America is divided between Japan and Nazi Germany. So thanks to America that they went to a war, we were able to live in this beautiful 30, 40 years, 50 years that we've been having right now in the West. Now, one of the reasons that the war got so big, because America also back then was digging their head in the ground and saying it's not our fault, it's not our problem, it's on them, it's on them. There's no such thing as allowing evil to prevail and then think it's not going to come to you next. Evil is evil. It's always going to come. Once it's done with one, it's going to go and try to take what is yours. And then when it's done with you, it's going to go to your neighbor. So when you look at the evil of, let's call it the Muslim empire, it was never defeated. Islam as an empire grew and became very big, and they went and clashed with the West. They almost conquered Europe if it wasn't for strong Christian knights that went. Now people love to talk bad about them because they see the Crusades and etc. But when you think about it, if it wasn't for these Crusades, for these knights, we would be living right now under the Muslim Khalifa in a very, very dark place. So Christianity won, and Jesus was, one of the best gifts that he gave humanity was when he was challenged by the Sanhedrin and they told him, show us the coin. And they were trying to trick him. And who should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? And he came and told them, what's the picture? Picture of Caesar. Give to Caesar what to Caesar, to God what to God. And he made the separation of religion and state. And then later on, Christianity was where democracy came out, was where science was flourishing, and the culture that we're living today. Suddenly, we were having airplanes and submarines, and the Muslims were still riding camels and donkeys, and they were overwhelmed. And the Muslim empire basically collapsed and became into small Muslim countries. There were a caliphate before, and then suddenly they couldn't handle it anymore, and they became Egypt, Libya, Lebanon, other places. They never really abandoned the dream of making the world Muslim. So when you look at a general picture of Islam, they still see themselves as in war with the West. So Canada, if they can colonize you and make Canada a caliphate, they'll do it. America, they'll do it. They're even saying it. They're not hiding it. They're walking.
They're explicit.
They're explicit. They're loud. Yeah.
They shout it from megaphones on the city streets of the most modern countries of the world. And when you watch what's happening across Europe, here we are again, and it really is this, I believe, isolationist ideology, and this, having not faced an existential threat in the Western world for so many years, we don't see things in the proper balance in terms of who's your friend, who's your enemy, what's good and what's evil. We seem very, very confused about that. But I do believe we're going to learn one way or the other. And we could listen to voices like you, Mansour, and get out in front of it. Or it can go the direction that we fear it is going. And
the question is how much blood will be spilled for that to learn. It's like that saying that strong man makes easy life make weak man make hard life. So we're in the weak man time. And the thing in that circle, I like to add to that, is that this equation, it's not like one generation, and then goes back. It could be one generation of strong man, then one generation of weak man, and then 1,000 generations of hard life until something happens to it. So if we don't wake up today and save the West that we have today, save the Christian world and the values that we're standing on, we might enter a very dark age that can last generations, hundreds of years, if maybe even. And
one of the things that we're committed to, and I just want to get this out there because we talk about it a lot, is we are in World War III, whether we know it or not. There is a battle being waged against our way of living, against Western civilization, against freedom and democracy, the civilized world. There is a war that's being waged. And right now, there are places in the world that it is a physical war that involves combat and violence. It's across the Middle East and Northern Africa and many different regions. In the Western world, it is right now a war of information that's been taking place for decades. And anyone who thinks that that is not going the direction of violent conflict is sadly mistaken. And we need to be engaged now. I have people that ask me all the time, is it too late? Is it too late already for the West? I don't have an answer to that. I like to believe, my answer is usually that depends on what we do right now. Are we going to draw the lines? That depends on those of you that are listening to this podcast. Are you going to get involved? Are you going to wake up? Are you going to acknowledge and identify this reality?
I will even add, Simon, you mentioned it right, that in the West, this war is manifesting a bit differently than, let's say, in Syria or in Israel, where it's very physical. I would say in the West, it's also manifesting in the aspect of the war over the family cell, the war over values and morality, the war over nationalism. Are you proud of your country or do you hate your country? One of the most interesting lessons that I've had when I was an officer in the Special Forces is about the importance of outposts on your defense line. And you have to understand as an officer to be able to defend your country, but also to be able to defeat your enemy. The whole purpose of an outpost or a base is to be able to defend the line of defense, but also have to have a sight with eye and with fire to the next outpost. So you have one outpost here, here, and here. So if one outpost is attacked, the other ones can defend it. Now, when does an outpost become ineffective? That's literally pure strategy from the military. An outpost become ineffective once they have an enemy from within. Because now you have your soldiers, instead of standing manning the wall and trying to look and help their brothers and sisters, now they need to fight inside. And things start crumbling. So once you manage to send special forces to infiltrate one of the outposts or a terrorist to go inside, you have weakened the whole line of defense drastically, and now everything starts crumbling. One after the other, the whole line of defense starts falling, and that's why they keep saying that the line of defense is always going to be broken, so you have to prepare for that. So you have to have some reserve in the back ready to go and patch and fix everything. Now, with the West, I feel like the enemy that I've seen that they can't defeat, and when I'm saying the West right now, the one that is holding the West on their shoulders is America. Let's call it what it is. If America falls today, it's going to be a very dark world. I mean, Israel is going to have one hell of a fight to fight, and the whole world is going to go a very bad place. So one way to weaken the West is weaken America. One way to weaken America is weaken the family structures and the morality and the values, make them start thinking that evil is good and good is evil, confuse them about, they don't even know which genders they are. That's very, very interesting and kind of silly. When you come from where I live, I was walking here in Germany and I made a video kind of showing a transgender. We're going sideways, but it was just, it makes the point. He was maybe a 200-kilogram male. I don't know how much that in pounds, but like a huge guy with a beard that was wearing a 400 pounds, wearing a dress, a big beard. And he was standing as a queer for Palestine, and he was preaching about, supporting Palestine and hating Israel. And he had, a walking stick. So I came and I made a video and I said, does he even know what they're going to do to him if he goes to Palestine or Gaza? And then I had a German lady here in Germany that came, and she was very upset about the video that I made, but not because of the point. She said she was upset because I called him a he, and maybe he's a she or he identify. And I came and told her, listen, he's like a 4-pound male with a big beard, most likely have a schnitzkin. So where I come from, it's a he. It's not a she. Let's call for what it is. And then she started like really saying, I'm so disappointed of you. So, and then listen, honestly speaking, I come from a Druze house. It might sound crazy to you, but to me, usually a father is a male, a mother is a female. That's how I grew up. And I grew up, that my mom is a woman, my father is a man. And that's a simple life that I had. It didn't confuse me. But when you come and you look today in the West, they're getting so confused about so many fundamental things that they kind of forget that there's an enemy outside and that there's much bigger problems. And then if you put your head out a little bit and you look what happens in countries like Syria, in the Middle East, you start realizing how Christians and Druze and minorities, what kind of problems they have. They're not dealing who's going to go to which bathroom. They're dealing right now with ISIS, that is the government that want to come and behead their men and rape their women and kidnap their children and make them sex slaves. Inspired
they don't have the
by
luxury of wondering
no.
what gender am I, or there's no time for that. It's survival. It's how do I survive?
Mm-hmm.
And we see the erosion of society. We see the attack on just truth, and we've abandoned reason and rationale, and it's scary. I want to go back just for a minute. You've served, as you said, in elite units in the IDF. You served behind enemy lines for extended periods of time, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. If there were two or three things that you would want the Western world to know about what you observed and what's happened versus the narrative that's being proliferated around the world, what would those few things be? If you had a few points, as somebody that's experienced life in those regions and seen actual combat in those regions, what is the world missing?
I think one of the most important things that the world is missing right now regarding the conflict that we're seeing in Gaza is most people don't understand how difficult warfare is, especially urban warfare. And I would add to that, especially hostage rescue from an urban warfare. I came from a hostage rescue unit. I know how complicated it is just to rescue a hostage in New York or in Tel Aviv or in a city that is in your country. You need to bring so many forces. You need to block the whole street, evacuate a lot of the people that are living around. You need to control the whole air circulation, the electricity, the temperature in that building. You need to start sending your units to go and climb over the roof, sneaking or landing with a helicopter with like padded shoes so they can walk quietly on the roof. People need to be sneaking right now through the ventilation system, under the staircase, running around, making plans of how to break different walls. That's how complicated, and that is in your country. Now imagine doing that in Gaza, in tunnels under the ground where the whole people of Gaza are hostile towards you, where everything is booby trapped. Meanwhile, you have Hamas shooting RPGs on you. You're walking in the street trying to find a hostage. You see a few children running. And the next thing is these children come back with an RPG and start shooting at you. Then you get a sniper gun and someone with a machine gun opening and some explosion happening in the streets. Your friend have his knee blown off. You're dragging him out while trying to shoot. And then you break into a house and that house is booby trapped. You start fighting in that house right now, face to face with your friend is wounded. You get shot. You start shooting back. Your friends come in. They throw a grenade. The house blows down. You jump out of the window to try to go to another, flank them so you can shoot them from the other window. This is how this combat starts. It's very dirty and it's very on the ground. And while this is happening, suddenly the whole of Gaza starts coming at you. And people start shooting at you, throwing stuff at you from the roof. You take cover, RPGs flying everywhere. You call for air support. You call for reinforcements. Israel is not going to let their children to die there. So Israel goes and shoot a missile, start to open a corridor for them. Tanks started going in. And in all of that, civilians are going to die. Why? Because these guys are fighting among civilians. So someone sitting in New York or in LA, drinking his latte macchiato in an air conditioning Starbucks and thinking like, oh, Israel is so evil. Look how many innocent civilians they're killing. He have no idea what it means warfare, and you have no idea what it means rescuing hostages. I can tell you one thing that will happen that will save all these civilians. If Hamas would have gave away these hostages, immediately, here, take them back. We don't want to hold your children and women. Then none of this combat inside of urban territory condensed would have happened. You bring a tank. I just made a video the other day showing Israeli tank running over. Hamas basically jumped with about 20 terrorists and came and tried to attack. And the IDF was able to counter them face to face and stop them. And one of the terrorists went in and tried to shoot a tank, and the tank just had to run him. He had to make a split of a second. By the way, that terrorist was very stupid because the RPG would have never really, it would just boom and fall down because it doesn't have time for the warhead to kind of, the things go inside so it can explode.
A stupid terrorist? Anyway, go on. Do go on.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry.
So my point is that imagine that tank right now. You have a terrorist coming out of a tunnel. You have a split of a second. Run him over or shoot a shell into that terrorist or have your entire crew just die in the most horrific death. He will do that, and then once he hit the terrorist, the whole thing exploded, and then later you'll see that terrorist was holding a family of civilians inside that house, and they're dead as well. So can you really blame that tank commander? Can you really, if take anyone drinking latte right now and macchiato frappuccino with some vegan tofu milk, put him right now in that tank where he's trying to go and rescue his sister or his brother who's been held in a dungeon being tortured, and then someone is going to come right now and try to shoot an RPG at you. Would you shoot back? Would you run him over? Or would you just say, let him kill me and all my friends? You're probably going to shoot back unless you're suicidal or stupid. Now you shot back, you killed the terrorist, and you might have killed a few civilians in the process. Are you to blame?
Right.
That's the reality of war.
The level of nuance and the level of complexity, and we also know that this is an unprecedented war. Nothing like this has ever taken place in the history of warfare that we're aware of, where the civilian casualty rate historically is between 50 to 90% historically in urban warfare. We know that, okay? And those of you that question that, just go look it up. I don't have to cite sources. And then when you look at the decimation of Gaza, I don't hear a lot of people talking about, you'll hear Piers Morgan and these people say, and we do know from satellite imagery that somewhere around 70% of Gaza has been absolutely decimated because of everything that you're talking about right now. Nobody asked the question, to what extent would a military have to go to decimate 70% of civilian infrastructure in a region like Gaza that is overpopulated, one of the most densely populated places on planet Earth, and have an under 3% casualty rate amongst the civilian population, when historically in that scenario, so, and again, we're going off numbers that the estimates of 60 to 70,000 casualties, total casualties. Nobody knows who's civilian and who's combatant right now in Gaza. But that's very, very low.
Yeah.
When you consider it in contrast with just history, those civilian casualty rates of
It actually
50 to 90%.
It actually shows how trained is your army, how trained and how professional it is. And I'll give you a very good example because I know it from close hand, because one of my friends was one of the guys that jumped out of that helicopter. Remember when there was this flotilla? I think that was the name of that boat. Not the Greta Thunberg flotilla. I'm talking before.
Right.
That was coming to go into Gaza and break the siege again, and yada yada, all this nonsense. And then Israel sent the Navy SEALs to go intercept that boat. And they gave them paintballs. So the first team that went down were armed with paintball guns with these hoppers, just because they did not want to use lethal weapon. So they go down from the helicopter, and the moment one of the soldiers just lands first, he gets a crowbar in his face. The other one lands after him, gets an axe in his shoulder, and they start stabbing them. There's a bunch of raving Muslim guys on that boat, just with knives and crowbars, trying to kill these soldiers, lynch them. My friend was the second wave that jumped. He was in the helicopter above, and he saw what's happening. And when that happened, he took his pistol, he jumped down with the rope, went down. Now they started jumping one after the other to rescue their brothers. So as they landed down, the Navy SEALs there started taking their pistols and shooting to the knees and to the legs. I don't remember exactly the death count. It was very minimal. Maybe you can count them on one hand or maybe two hands max. And they managed to win that fight and to subdue the people on the boat and managed to stop the boat. If you would have sent any other army unit into that situation, you would have probably had 100 to 200 casualties, because they will just panic and start shooting everything. Same thing in Israel. Israel have invaded Gaza, most hostile place on the face of this earth, holding their hostages, booby-trapped everywhere, armed to their teeth, and so condensed, and the number of casualties is so low. There's literally more missiles launched by Israel on Gaza than casualties in Gaza. Every missile like that can easily take 100 to 200 to 500 people if they would want, if you'd aim it well. But the fact that we shot more missiles into Gaza and have less people dead just shows you that every missile was thought through, the precision that was. I remember one time sitting, and I'm sorry for going with these stories, but
No, it's okay. The world needs to hear it.
I kind of lived that world. I remember one time I was sitting in a war room, and I was next to a very big general and the Shabak guy next to me. And they saw through the satellite imagery or the drone, they saw about 15 terrorists running. And the general started calling the pilot, telling him, launch the missile right now, take them down. The pilot refused. He says, I don't have enough information to make a clean shot. Now the general watching the screens telling him, I see them, they're there, shoot now, I give you an order. That pilot had the nerve of steel. That was a high general. Told him, sorry, sir, I'm not going to take that shot until I get another confirmation. So special units, I don't know, had to go there and give another laser point to make sure that this guided missile will reach the right place, just so he doesn't end up accidentally killing innocent civilians. Now, at a certain point, the 15 terrorists managed to go behind one of the buildings and disappeared from our sight. And I'm telling you, that general was shouting and cursing that pilot, telling him he's gonna catch him, he's gonna court-martial him. That pilot just kept, nervous. Still, sorry, sir, I'm not gonna take that shot until I have I have very clear rules of engagement. The Shabak picks up a phone and he phones one of his guys in Gaza. And that guy basically goes out of his house, walk a little bit, and then tell us exactly where the terrorists are. And then the airplane recalibrate, goes around, finds them. They go out of the neighborhood. Boom, 15 of them dead. We take them out in one shot. I asked the Shabak guy, who did he talk to? And he told me this was one of the most impressive Palestinian men he's ever met in his life. And I said, what do you mean? He says, it's an older man. That's way long ago, so I'm not kind of exposing anything secret here that is going to jeopardize forces. He said it's an older man that have lost his kid to an IDF fire. But the reason he lost his kid is because Hamas was giving candies and collecting children and then went and took an RPG and aimed it at a tank. The tank noticed that there's an RPG aimed at him, turned the turret, and had to make a split of a second decision. Shoot that terrorist or the whole crew dies. He shoots that terrorist. Little did he know, behind that wall and everything, there were children. That man's child died. But the Shabak guy told me, but that man had such a strong moral and core values that he knew that the reason that he lost his child, and as a father, I can feel that, just imagine losing your kid, most precious thing that you have in your life. So the reason he lost his child is not because of the IDF, it's because of Hamas. Because if Hamas would have not done what they're doing, would have not used his child as a human shield, his child would have stayed alive. So that Palestinian man made it his life mission to destroy Hamas. And he started working with the Shabak and helped the Shabak. So I think that can give some context of that reality to people back home who think this is a black and white picture. There's innocent Gazans, there's a very strong and mighty and vicious IDF. It's no. There is families on the ground, there's humans that had their life kidnapped by a terrorist organization that have destroyed everything that they hold value, that have destroyed their life, and now is trying to destroy Israel. And the only way to destroy them, to uproot them, is by war, is by sending your military, your special forces, your air force, and it can get bloody. But we have to finish the job. If we don't finish the job, we're going to keep dealing with that.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I think it is so important for people to understand how these things unfold and that there are good people on both sides of this, and that just the impossible situation that, yes, the IDF is over and over and over again finding themselves in these tactical, very, very challenging situations, but also the people of Gaza. And this is what's truly tragic. Where is the global voice on behalf of that father? That's the real solution to this problem, dealing with the root cause. And instead of dealing with the root cause, this evil, and taking care of it, the world instead criticizes Israel, who's trying to solve the problem, protect that father in those scenarios, protect those children, and time again placed in these impossible and tragic situations. And I do want to pivot to talking about the Druze and what's happening in Syria. But before we do that, could you just talk for a minute, what I believe is one of the greatest tragedies on planet Earth today, and is exemplified in Gaza at the hands of Hamas, which is the militarization of children. I don't know that there is a greater evil on behalf of the people of Gaza, the Palestinians, the militarization of their youth, and then also, the evil that brings to the world and brings to Israel. And we know that is a strategy and a tactic that is used. You hear a lot about the death toll amongst children in Gaza, but you don't hear a lot about the reasons why. And you don't hear a lot about the militarization of youth. And most people don't know that over 50% of Gaza population are under the age of 18. So the majority of people in Gaza are what the world considers to be children. You also don't hear people asking the question, at what point, at what age does somebody become a terrorist? When does somebody become a terrorist? Is it age relative? Is it a gender relative? You and I both know the answer to that question. You
I
become a
think
terrorist when you decide to carry out an act of violence against civilians. When you try to commit an act of terror, you are a terrorist and you have to be dealt with the way that terrorists have to be dealt with. But could you just speak to that whole subject, which is one of, to me, again, just one of the most heartbreaking situations on the planet?
so. Again, I'll speak from my experience, from my personal experience with that, and I think that's the best way to explain to the people what is really happening. I remember one time getting called to a checkpoint that I was a commanding officer of that base, and my soldiers just stopped a 14 years old Palestinian that came with a knife, and he had swastikas written, like, drawn over his pants and, his hands. And he came to stab and kill IDF soldiers and, in general, Jewish people. And they managed to subdue him. My soldiers grabbed him down, pinned him down, took the knife away from him, and took him. And now he's handcuffed and he's waiting in a room. And I get woken up from my bed and I go there. And I walk into the room and I know the Shabak is going to come anytime soon to take him away. But I wanted to talk to that kid because he was 14, maybe even 13. Like, you can see, he was clearly a kid who just took a knife and decided to go and kill other humans and die in the process. There's no way he's coming out of this alive. And as I go in, I see him, he's like full of like pride and anger. And he's like, I'm not afraid of you. You can do whatever you want to me and that and this. And Allah is with me and Allahu Akbar and this. And I wish I could kill you all. And he's spitting. And, my guys are trying to calm him down. And his hands are tied. Now that's a kid. Again, a kid. What do you do with him? Like, he just came and tried to murder you. He's lucky he was not shot. One of my soldiers took the risk of coming close to him to disarm him rather than just shoot him. He came close to him, he tried to swing in, he moved, he hit him in the face, put him down, took the knife, but that's like on his own risk just because he didn't want to kill a kid. So I'm seeing this young kid there giving all this talks, and I just grab my hand, I smack the table, and I start shouting at him in Arabic, and he just froze, and then he starts crying. And my soldier came later on and asked me, what do you tell him in Arabic? And I said, I told him, does your mother know that you're here? He just froze. And when I saw froze, just smacked the table again. He said, does your mother know that her child is dead? And he froze again. And then I asked him, do your parents know what you're doing? And he says, no, I didn't tell them. So I said, what happened? How did you end up walking the street, deciding to go and stab Israelis and die in the process? So local mosques in that city started doing this radical teaching. They will go and collect these kids from the streets and start brainwashing them that the glorious thing that can happen in their life is that they will die in the name of Allah, and that they will go, and the best thing is to kill the Jews, and then Allah is going to be proud of you. Kill the Christians, kill the infidels. Allah is going to love you for that. And start pouring that to their heads, and then start telling them again and again, if you do that. And then to the point that I told them, if you do that, we'll buy your parents a new house. So go and do that. So you have this radicalization of young kids from such a young age. They're starting, and that was back then. That was about maybe almost 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. I don't remember exactly, but that was quite long. Today, the radicalization went even to kindergarten ages, and the parents are in it. Back then, the parents were not in it. You see, the system started by grabbing these kids away from their parents and then brainwashing them to become shaheeds. And then later on, these kids grew up to become parents. Now you don't need to do that anymore. So that is the generation that we're seeing in Gaza right now of these children that became parents. That 14 years old kid, back then, 20 years ago, he's now 34 years old. He's probably have a wife and maybe a few kids. His kids are growing right now with this indoctrination. So you have a whole nation that is teaching the children to become martyrs, to become murderers, to want to kill, to think that rape is justified, to think that it's okay to do. By the way, this is nothing new in Islam. And I think this is very important to say. We're hearing a lot about these sexual crimes that are happening. The Ottoman Empire used to do the same. They will go to a church after they kill the men, and they will rape the women in the church and then behead them in the church, and then just go again and again. And they even made a rule back then, because they were going and killing so many Christians and raping so many women, and they will take some of these women as slaves. But in Islam, once you take a woman, she becomes a Muslim. And once you have a child, the child is Muslim. And that was suddenly the empire was starting to deal with some very contradicting, like, what do we do? So they're Muslims just like us. Can we keep treating them like slaves? So then they made a rule that came and said that you can keep these women of the Christians and the infidels as sabiya, not sabaya. Sabaya is a teenage girl. Sabiya means that a sexual slave that is kind of in the gray border. She's not really Muslim. She is. No one cares. And then you can pass her on between your warriors to be raped constantly again and again, and at a certain point even sell her to someone to get some more money to buy more weapons. So then you have sex trafficking that is very big in the Muslim world. I'm generalizing in big here, but we're talking, it is, calls what it is. So when you see that, that is exactly what is happening in Syria right now with the Yazidis, with the Christians, with the Druze. They're kidnapping their girls. They have a religious fatwa for that. That is something that has not been invented right now by some radicals, something that has been going on for centuries under the Muslim empire. And now just different factions are bringing it back to reality. So when you have a whole society choose to believe in these things, that this is right, that this is justified, then you end up having terrorist kids. You end up having to fight 12 years old. It's either you kill him or he kills you. You don't let him kill you, because if he kills you, he kills your friends. And that's 2, 3, 4 good men that will not walk this earth, will not have children, and will not make planet Earth a better place. And that is one very evil, radical jihadist that is gonna go and kill other people later on, and then go and rape more women, bring more children, and progress the greater radical Muslim empire that is trying to grab a hold of this earth.
I think it was Golda Meir that said it this way: "We can forgive you for killing our children, but we can never forgive you for making us kill yours." Truer words, have never been spoken. And perhaps she was even somehow seeing into the future, because we know that, as you've said, whatever was the case 50 and 60, 70 years ago, it's way worse today. And what you're saying is something that the world needs to take note of. If those of you that are out there that are concerned for the children of Gaza, listen to what's being said here and look at the root cause of casualties amongst the children of Gaza. I do want to pivot, and I think it's a good caveat, Mansour, to what's happening in Syria amongst I'm going to say religious minorities. I know it's Druze and Christians under this new emerging regime. So I want to talk about that a little bit, and I'd like you to even bring some very specific context in, maybe talk about the massacre that took place at the hospital that we know of, and just let the world know what's going on there.